The 1960s were more than just the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. They were a golden era, brimming with bands that once ruled the airwaves. But what happened to those groups that shined bright and then vanished without a trace? There are forgotten bands of the 1960s that vanished without a trace, with their own unique stories. The Turtles. The Turtles were one of those bands that could capture the spirit of an era with just a few chords. Their breakout hit, Happy Together, became an anthem of the 1960s, reaching #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1967. The song's infectious melody and upbeat lyrics made it an instant classic, symbolizing the joy and optimism of the time. For a while, it seemed like the Turtles were unstoppable, delivering hit after hit that resonated with a generation. However, the music landscape of the late 1960s was rapidly evolving. The cheerful, poppy sound that had made the Turtles famous began to fall out of favor as rock music grew darker and more complex. Bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were pushing boundaries, experimenting with new sounds and deeper themes, while the Turtles' music remained rooted in a simpler, more innocent style. This shift in audience preferences put pressure on the band to adapt, but internal conflicts made it difficult for them to evolve. Tensions within the group started to surface as they struggled to keep up with the changing times. Creative differences and disagreements over the band's direction led to friction among the members. By the late 1960s, these internal struggles, combined with the pressure to stay relevant in a rapidly changing music scene, began to take their toll. The Turtles found themselves unable to replicate the success of Happy Together and gradually faded from the spotlight. But they're not the only ones who had it all, and then vanished. The Tremeloes. The Tremeloes burst onto the scene with their cheerful hit, Here Comes My Baby. Released in 1967, the song quickly climbed the charts, capturing listeners with its catchy melody and light-hearted lyrics. The band was riding high, becoming one of the most recognizable names in bubblegum pop, a genre that focused on upbeat tunes, simple lyrics, and an infectious rhythm that appealed to a wide audience. For a while, the Tremeloes seemed like they could do no wrong. However, the late 1960s brought significant changes to the music scene. The cheerful, carefree style that had made the Tremeloes popular started to feel out of step with the darker, more introspective direction rock music was taking. Audiences were beginning to favor bands that explored heavier themes and more complex sounds. As rock music evolved, with groups like The Doors and Jimi Hendrix pushing the boundaries of what music could express, the Tremeloes' light pop sound began to feel dated. The Tremeloes struggled to adapt to this new landscape. While they tried to maintain their position in the charts, their style of music was increasingly seen as too simple and sweet for a decade that was becoming more serious and reflective. The band's attempts to stay relevant were met with diminishing returns, and their music slowly fell out of favor with both the critics and the public. And if you thought that was surprising, wait till you hear what happened too. The Grassroots. The Grassroots were a staple of 1960s rock radio, known for their smooth, catchy melodies and radio-friendly sound. Their biggest hit, Midnight Confessions, released in 1968, quickly climbed the charts and became an anthem of its time. The song's soulful groove and relatable lyrics made it a favorite among listeners, earning the Grassroots a solid place in the music scene. For a while, it seemed like they had found the perfect formula for success, with a steady stream of hits that kept them in the public eye. However, as the decade progressed, the music world began to shift toward heavier, more experimental sounds. Rock music was moving away from the clean, polished style that defined the Grassroots, embracing a grittier and more intense approach. Bands like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath were introducing audiences to harder, more aggressive rock, while the grassroots stuck to their familiar sound. This reluctance to adapt made it difficult for them to maintain their status in a rapidly changing industry. As their peers pushed musical boundaries, the grassroots found themselves struggling to stay relevant. Their attempts to shift their style and capture the new trends were often seen as too little, too late. The band continued to release music, but it failed to have the same impact as their earlier hits. The changing tastes of the audience, combined with the band's reluctance to fully embrace a new direction, led to their gradual decline. Now, let's move to a band whose costumes were as bold as their music. Paul Revere and the Raiders. Paul Revere and the Raiders were a band like no other. Known for their flashy Revolutionary War-style uniforms and high-energy performances, they brought a unique blend of rock and theatrics to the music scene of the mid-1960s. With hits like Kicks and Hungry, they quickly gained a loyal following and became a regular presence on TV shows like Where the Action Is, which helped cement their popularity. Their catchy tunes and vibrant stage presence made them a favorite among younger audiences. But as the decade progressed, the musical landscape began to change dramatically. The late 1960s saw the rise of psychedelic rock, with its experimental sounds, complex lyrics, and a focus on deeper, often introspective themes. Bands like The Doors and Pink Floyd were redefining what rock music could be. Drawing in audiences that were looking for more than just entertainment, they wanted an experience. Paul Revere and the Raiders, with their clean-cut image and straightforward rock sound, began to feel out of place in this new world of music. Their style, which had once been fresh and exciting, was now viewed as too commercial and too safe for a music scene that was becoming more adventurous and rebellious. As the popularity of psychedelic rock grew, the appeal of their polished pop rock began to fade. From flashy uniforms to a band that was ahead of its time but still disappeared. The Zombies. The Zombies were a band ahead of their time, known for their haunting melodies and sophisticated sound. Their most famous track, Time of the Season, released in 1968, became a defining anthem of the late 60s. With its hypnotic rhythm and distinct bass line, the song captivated listeners and remains a timeless classic to this day. However, even with their talent and creativity, the Zombies found it challenging to achieve lasting success during their initial run. Their 1968 album, Odessey and Oracle, which included Time of the Season, is now considered a masterpiece, but at the time of its release, it went largely unnoticed. The band's innovative approach to music, combining elements of jazz, rock, and pop, was perhaps too ahead of what mainstream audiences were ready to embrace. Unfortunately, their groundbreaking work did not receive the recognition it deserved until years later. Internal pressures and financial difficulties took their toll, and the Zombies disbanded shortly after the release of Odessey and Oracle. Ironically, it was only after their breakup that Time of the Season began climbing the charts in the United States, reaching number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. By then, the band members had already gone their separate ways, missing the opportunity to capitalize on the song's delayed success. Though their career was short-lived, the Zombies' influence has endured. Their music, particularly Time of the Season, has been rediscovered by new generations, earning them a place among the legends of the 1960s. However, they remain a classic example of a band that, despite their potential and talent, did not achieve the level of fame they truly deserved while they were still together. And speaking of bands that should have lasted longer, The Association. The Association was a group that defined the lighter side of the 1960s with their smooth harmonies and melodic pop sound. Their hit songs like Cherish and Windy topped the charts, becoming instant classics. Cherish, a ballad filled with emotion, showcased their vocal range and harmony, quickly becoming one of the most requested love songs on the radio. Meanwhile, Windy offered a more upbeat, feel-good vibe that captured the spirit of the times. At their peak, the Association was one of the best-selling bands of the 60s, known for their polished sound and well-crafted arrangements. They were masters of blending different musical elements to create songs that were both catchy and sophisticated, making them favorites at music festivals and on TV shows. However, their light, airy style began to seem out of step with the evolving music scene. As rock music began to turn edgier and more experimental in the late 1960s, the Association's soft harmonies and pop-focused approach started to feel old-fashioned. The rise of hard rock and psychedelic bands, with their more intense, raw sounds, shifted audience tastes. The band's efforts to adapt to the new trends were met with mixed reactions. Their fan base craved their original sound, while new listeners sought something more daring. Next, a band that pioneered a sound even before it became popular. The Beau Brummels. The Beau Brummels were one of the first American bands to embrace the folk rock sound that would later become hugely popular. With their 1965 hit Laugh, Laugh, they made a mark on the music scene, combining catchy melodies with a blend of folk and rock elements. The song, featuring its distinct harmonica and guitar riffs, became a top 20 hit and caught the attention of many listeners who were looking for something fresh and different. The Beau Brummels had a promising start, often being compared to the Byrds and other successful bands that followed the same musical path. However, their rise to fame was cut short by a force much larger than themselves, the British invasion. With bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Who dominating the airwaves and capturing the hearts of American audiences, the Beau Brummels struggled to maintain their footing. Their talent and early success were overshadowed by British acts, who brought a new energy and style that left little room for emerging American bands. The Beau Brummels tried to keep pace, releasing more music, and even moving to Los Angeles to be closer to the heart of the rock scene. However, they found it difficult to compete with the wave of British bands dominating the charts and capturing public attention. Their later songs received less radio play, and their record label faced financial problems, which further hindered their ability to stay in the spotlight. Although they continued to perform and release new material, they never regained the momentum they had with Laugh, Laugh. The Beau Brummels became a footnote in music history, remembered mainly by dedicated fans and music historians. Now, from folk rock to a band that brought magic to music. The Lovin' Spoonful. The Lovin' Spoonful brought a fresh, upbeat sound to the 1960s music scene with hits like Do You Believe in Magic and Summer in the City. Their music had a playful energy that made listeners feel good, combining elements of folk, rock, and pop with a bit of blues thrown in for good measure. Do You Believe in Magic quickly became an anthem for young listeners, with its catchy tune and lyrics celebrating the joy of music. Summer in the City, with its gritty urban feel and driving beat, topped the charts in 1966, showing the band's versatility and broad appeal. For a time, the Lovin' Spoonful seemed to have found the perfect recipe for success, scoring multiple hits and becoming regulars on the radio and TV. Their songs captured the carefree, optimistic spirit of the mid-60s, resonating with a wide audience. However, as the decade progressed, the music landscape began to change, and so did the fortunes of the band. Internal conflicts and legal troubles began to surface, leading to key members leaving the group. As these tensions grew, their ability to create new, compelling music waned. Meanwhile, music tastes were shifting towards heavier, more experimental sounds, and the light-hearted, sunny style that had made the Lovin' Spoonful famous was falling out of favor. Bands like The Doors and the Jimi Hendrix Experience were captivating audiences with their deeper, more intense music, while the Lovin' Spoonful sound started to feel out of place. By the late 1960s, the band was struggling to maintain their earlier success. Their new releases did not achieve the same level of acclaim, and their internal issues made it difficult to regroup. Eventually, they faded from the charts and the public eye, becoming another name in the list of bands that couldn't adapt to the rapidly changing musical era. And now, a band that never quite reached the heights of their peers, the Hollies. The Hollies were a major force during the British invasion, known for their tight harmonies and catchy melodies. With hits like Bus Stop and He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother, they captured the hearts of fans around the world. Bus Stop, with its infectious beat and relatable story of a chance meeting at a bus stop, became an international success in 1966, reaching the top 10 in both years, the UK and the US. Meanwhile, He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother showcased their emotional depth and became a timeless anthem of compassion and brotherhood. Throughout the 1960s, the Hollies were a consistent presence on the charts, known for their ability to craft memorable songs that appealed to a wide audience. They were skilled at blending pop with folk and rock, creating a sound that was both accessible and sophisticated. Their rich vocal harmonies set them apart from many of their contemporaries, and their songs often featured strong hooks and thoughtful lyrics. However, as the 1960s turned into the 1970s, the Hollies began to face challenges that would slowly diminish their place in the spotlight. Changes in music trends meant that their polished pop-rock style started to feel out of step with the more experimental and heavy rock sounds that were becoming popular. At the same time, internal changes within the band, including the departure of key members like Graham Nash, who went on to form Crosby, Stills, and Nash, affected their creative dynamics. The Hollies continued to release music and perform, but their newer songs struggled to find the same level of success as their earlier hits. While they remained active and retained a dedicated fan base, they gradually faded from mainstream attention. By the late 1970s, they had become more of a nostalgic act rather than chart toppers. And finally, let's talk about the band that was a launch pad for rock legends. The Yardbirds. The Yardbirds were a band that brought something unique to the 1960s music scene. Known for their innovative sound and groundbreaking guitar work, they became a launchpad for some of rock's greatest guitar legends. Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page all started their careers with the Yardbirds. With hits like For Your Love and Heart Full of Soul, they helped shape the future of rock and blues, blending the two in a way that felt fresh and exciting. Their impact on music and the immense talent in their lineup didn't translate into the recognition the Yardbirds deserved during their time together. This can partly be attributed to their constant lineup changes, which made it difficult for them to establish a consistent musical identity. Each guitarist brought his style to the band, creating a dynamic but somewhat fragmented musical journey. The Yardbirds were pioneers of experimentation, incorporating feedback, distortion, and innovative recording techniques that influenced the development of psychedelic and hard rock. However, their experimental approach did not always align with mainstream tastes, limiting their commercial success compared to other British invasion bands. By the late 1960s, internal conflicts and shifting musical directions caused the band to split. The remaining members reformed as Led Zeppelin under Jimmy Page's leadership, taking some of the Yardbirds' experimental spirit to new heights. Ironically, while their legacy lived on through the success of their former members, the Yardbirds themselves were left somewhat in the shadows. But before we wrap up, let's not forget a bonus band that left its mark. The Small Faces. The Small Faces were a central part of the mod rock scene in the UK, known for their energetic performances and innovative style. Their hits Ichiku Park and Lazy Sunday captured the spirit of the late 1960s, blending rock with soulful melodies and an unmistakable British charm. Ichiku Park, with its dreamy feel and distinctive phasing effects, became a psychedelic anthem, while Lazy Sunday was a playful nod to everyday life in London. The band's charismatic frontman, Steve Marriott, along with his bandmates, created a unique sound that resonated with fans of the mod movement, a cultural phenomenon centered around fashion, music, and rebellion. The Small Faces were not just musicians, they were style icons, embodying the mod aesthetic with their sharp suits and attitude. However, their rise to fame was short-lived. As members began to pursue other projects, including forming bands like Faces or joining the Rolling Stones, the Small Faces started to lose momentum. This fragmentation made it hard for the band to maintain their earlier success. The departure of Marriott in 1969 was a significant blow, and although they continued with new members, they struggled to keep their identity. The 1960s gave us countless bands, some of which vanished as quickly as they rose to fame. These forgotten groups remind us that even the brightest stars can fade. If you enjoyed finding these hidden gems, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay with us on this journey through music history.